and intelligent routing means that you can deliver requests with much lower latency than in a traditional network where you have to go all the way to the origin servers. A second benefit of ICN is that because content requests do not need to traverse the whole network, you reduce the congestion in the core of the network. And as a result, it simplifies traffic engineering for ISPs and the network service providers. And because you're decoupling names and locations, you have almost intrinsic support for mobility. You don't have to bind to an IP address, you're just getting the content based on your content names. And finally, the security properties that you offer to the users is bound to the content itself, and rather than being bound to the communication channel or external mechanisms. So while these benefits are really promising and really nice to have, it turns out that getting a lot of these benefits, at least in the way ICN proposals are envisioned today, is actually very painful. So many ICN proposals envision a network where every router is equipped with a content store or a cache. So this means that every router needs to be upgraded to support this kind of content store. And not only that, the routing inside the infrastructure is no longer IP or destination IP based, but instead it has to be based on content, the content names. So this means you have variable length names, you need to match on flat names and so on. So there is questions with respect to the scalability of the forwarding and the routing mechanisms for ICN to be supported. So the motivation for this talk is really very simple. So we see this disconnect between the gains, which is the nice part about ICN, and the pains of deployment, where we need to change every router, we need to change routing inside the network. So the motivating question for our work, which is very simple to state, is can we get the benefits that ICN promises as a concept without going through the deployment pains that some of these proposals may incur? In particular, can we get it with existing technologies that are already out there, and can we get it in an incrementally deployable fashion without having to upgrade every router and every switch and every host in the network? So this question is actually really simple to state, but addressing this question or answering this question is actually quite challenging. And the reason is that there are many different proposals and many different concepts in ICN, many different implementation artifacts out there. So our goal is not to actually focus on specific implementation architectures or specific implementation artifacts, but really try to understand which of the ICN design principles or tenets are fundamentally important here. So to this end, what we're going to try and do in this work is try and decouple or sort of try and dissect the benefits and the gains and attribute them to the different core design principles. And in this respect, we observe that the quantitative benefits that ICN offers in terms of performance, latency, traffic engineering, and so on, can really be attributed to the fact that you're adding caches inside the network and you're doing intelligent routing inside the network. On the other hand, other kinds of benefits which are more qualitative, things like support for mobility, support for security, and so on, really stem from the fact that you're doing this high-level decoupling between what you want and where you're getting it from, and you're binding the security to the content name itself. So in some sense, what we find is there are really these two classes of benefits that ICN proposals offer, the quantitative aspects and the qualitative aspects. And in some sense, if you look at this picture, you will find that it's really the quantitative aspects where you have to upgrade the routers, upgrade the routing, is really causing most of the deployment pain. So, and what we try and do is like see whether we can alleviate some of those pains, and then that might lead us to a path where we can have a more incrementally deployable ICN architecture. Alright, if you want to stop listening to me right now and go back checking your email, here are the key takeaways from this talk. What we show through a series of extensive analyses in this paper is that to achieve the quantitative benefits that ICN promises, that is simplifying traffic engineering or lower latency, is that we don't really need this kind of pervasive caching or fancy nearest replica routing mechanisms. We can in fact get most of these benefits with a simple edge-based caching architecture. And the intuition here is that for the kinds of workloads we expect for ICN architectures, heavy tail, zip-tail workloads, these fancy mechanisms, pervasive caching, replica routing, don't really add much. In some sense, if this content is popular, you already get it from the edge. If the content is rare, you have to go to the origin anyway. So the levels in the intermediary levels don't really have much value. And to address these qualitative benefits, what we observe is that most of these qualitative benefits can actually be built on top of existing technologies that have already been developed in the web and HTTP literature. And together, these two insights that we have in this work form the basis for an incrementally deployable ICN architecture. All right, so that's the context for this work. What I'm going to do in the next part of this talk is really focus on the quantitative aspects. So if you recall, the quantitative aspects are the ones that cause the most amount of deployment pain, changing routers and changing routing as well. So we're going to focus on the quantitative aspects first, before moving to the qualitative aspects, and then sketching one feasible design of an incrementally deployable ICN architecture. All right. So the quantitative benefits really stem from caching, right? There's nothing more to it than just having all these caches inside the network. And again, our high order goal here is not to pick on any specific ICN architecture, but really try and understand the broader design space of caching here. And to this end, what we did was we identified that any caching architecture can really be represented on a two-dimensional axis. One dimension is the cache placement mechanism. So where are the caches inside the network? Are they at the edge of the network? Are they in the code? Are they everywhere? And so on. Another dimension to this design space is really how are these content requests routed through the network? Do you do simple vanilla routing where you do just IP routing towards the origin server? Or do you do some of these more fancier routing so you find the nearest replica inside the network? So these two dimensions together sort of capture a broad spectrum of options in the ICN design space. And what we do is we evaluate a few key representative sample points from this design space. In particular, we can look at two sort of extreme solutions. At one extreme, you have ICN-NR, which is doing pervasive caching, that is caching everywhere, coupled with intelligent nearest replica routing. On the other hand, you can consider a much simpler edge-based caching architecture where you only cache at the edge of the network, and the routing is simpler. You just route towards the shortest path towards the origin. If you hit an edge cache, you get the content. If you hit a miss, you just go. If you get a miss, you just go to the origin server. You can also consider other intermediary points in the design space. For example, you can consider pervasive caching coupled with just shortest path routing. So that we call ICN-SP. Or you can consider extensions to the simple edge architecture where you enable some sort of local cooperation between the edge nodes. So we evaluate these different points in the design space using an extensive set of simulations. And to sort of bootstrap our simulations, we use realistic topologies from Rocket Fuel. And we extend these topologies with what we call access trees to represent a somewhat realistic router level topology. So the leaves of this access tree conceptually represent the edge of the network. Requests for content arrive at the different leaves in the network. So and we use realistic logs from a real CDN to bootstrap the simulation of the request here. We also consider a whole bunch of synthetic Zipfian workloads as well. There are many different parameters to the simulation setup in terms of how the caches are provisioned, in terms of what's the cache replacement policy, and so on. In this talk, I'm going to talk about these specific parameters, and we also do an extensive sensitivity analysis later on in this talk. And finally, we're going to assume, sort of conservatively, that things like name-based routing and name-based lookup do not incur much cost. So we assume that there is a feasible implementation and there's a scalable implementation of name-based forwarding, name-based routing, and so on. So we're going to be conservative and give ICN the benefit of doubt. All right. So the first key metric we're interested in is the request latency. So the request latency here is measured in terms of the number of hops on this network that we created. And the graph here on the y-axis shows the percentage improvement in the request latency over a system with no caching. That is, what's the benefit that an ICN architecture offers over a system with no caches. Again, higher on the y-axis is better, right? You're getting more improvement over a no caching architecture. The x-axis shows different tier 1 ISP topologies, and the different bars show the different caching designs, points in the caching design space. Things like ICN-NR, ICN-SP, Edge, and Edge cooperation. And the key takeaway here is that the gap between the different architectures, between Edge cooperation, ICN-SP, and ICN-NR, is really, really very small. The gap is at most 10% between Edge and ICN-NR, for example. And the intuition here goes back to the statement that with the kind of workloads we expect, which are heavy-tailed and Zipfian, most of the action really happens at the edge. Most of the benefits of caching really come from the edge caches. The interior caching or the pervasive caching inside the network doesn't really add much. We see similar results for other key metrics as well, the network congestion and the load of the origin server as well. And these are consistent. The load gap is consistent across all three metrics. So at this point, you might be wondering, okay, this graph shows one particular simulation setup, right? One particular set of parameters for caching, for cache replacement, for the request logs, and so on. So what we did do is an extensive sensitivity analysis, where we look at the space of all these simulation parameters, the zip value, the cache replacement, the cache allocation, and so on. And then we find what's the best case for ICN NR. That is, this full-blown ICN proposal with pervasive caching and nearest replica routing. And see under what set of parameters does ICN NR offer the best performance gap over the simpler edge-based architecture. Right? So the y-axis here shows the percentage gap, the absolute percentage gap between ICN NR and edge. Higher on the y-axis here means that, in some sense, this full-blown ICN is giving you a lot of benefit. And what we find here, and this is across sort of an extensive range sweep over the parameter space. And we find even in the best case, ICN NR, this full-blown ICN proposal, is only offering you like something like 17% improvement across all three metrics: latency, congestion, and origin server load. Right? So even if you go the full deployment, the benefit you get is quite small. And not just that, it turns out that you can actually do very, very simple extensions to the basic edge caching architecture, simply increasing the size of the cache. For example, normalizing the budget between the caching budget between ICN and the edge, or doubling the size of the edge cache can dramatically improve the performance of edge caches over the edge caching architecture over the full-blown ICN NR architecture. So in some sense, this simple idea of just adding more storage to the edge can dramatically reduce the gap, even in the best case scenario for ICN. So what are the implications of this edge-based caching architecture, right? So what we feel is that this edge-based caching architecture is nice on two accounts. The first is actually that it's incrementally deployable, in the sense that if I'm an ISP, if I'm an enterprise, if I'm a university, I can go and simply deploy an edge cache without really waiting for the rest of the network to adopt ICN. I can deploy an edge cache, and my users will benefit from those edge caches. And the second is that there is this sort of deployment incentive for these domains to adopt this to adopt edge caching, because if I go and deploy it, my users actually see the most benefit. So this is nice about edge caching in the sense that it's incrementally deployable and incentive compatible with the interests of different domains. So now that we've established that this kind of edge caching is a promising road for ICN in terms of incremental deployment, next we focus on sort of the remaining aspect, which is the qualitative benefits that ICN offers. And then we'll sketch an incrementally deployable ICN architecture. Alright, so let's revisit what were the qualitative benefits, right? So there were really two key ICN design principles that led to the qualitative benefits. The first was this idea of decoupling names from locations, decoupling what you wanted from where it's being served from. And the second was binding the content names to the intent of the content I really wanted. What we see is that the first aspect of sort of decoupling what from where or names from locations is in some sense already provided by HTTP. HTTP in some sense already offers a get by name abstraction, which means that we can build a lot of the mechanisms or technologies we want using existing HTTP technologies, right? For example, we can do proxy discovery using existing web protocols. And the second aspect of binding these names to the intents, again, we observe that there's been a lot of work in the crypto world, in the web and content delivery world, on providing these kinds of authenticity and integrity properties. For example, many P2P protocols today already use magnet URI schemes that carry a cryptographic hash of the content as an integrity check. And all we need to do is build on existing HTTP extensions to provide this metadata for, say, giving the crypto keys and the hashes. Alright, so building on these two insights, what I'm going to do very briefly in the next part is sketch one possible realization of an incrementally deployable ICN architecture. Again, we don't claim this is optimal, this is not the only feasible solution, this is a feasible solution in this case. So let's walk through what needs to happen at the origin server or the content provider side for IDICN. This is incrementally deployable ICN. And we're going to first look at the content registration steps. So the way an origin server is going to register content is to pick names of a particular form. So the name has a particular form which says, which is l.p.idicn.org. idicn.org is a sort of a dedicated domain that we use for idicn. L is a content label, say a particular part of the website. And P is a hash of the public key. So this provides some sort of a self-certifying property that provides verification guarantees later on. For example, in our demo that I point to later on, we've created sort of a IDICN clone of Wikipedia, and here's an example URL that you would register in this case. So EN is the content label, and this whole sort of numbers 5671 and so on is the hash of the public key. And the key here is that this is the only modification that needs to happen to the content provider side. It just needs to register this content to this this sort of name resolution system with a specific form of the URL. Now, one question you may have is who's actually running this IDICN, who's running the DNS on behalf of the name resolution system for IDICN.org. And here we envision that a consortium of popular web providers and DNS providers like VeriSign, Akamai, Google, and so on can sort of group together and offer this kind of service for registering these content names. And again, the kind of workload we envision here is sort of comparable or even less than the kind of workload that these big players already see today. So that's about what's happening on the content provider side of things. Let's look at what's happening on the client side of things. What's happening on the client side of things is actually very, very simple. All the client needs to do is discover what this edge cache is. So you have a proxy edge cache that this client's domain, my university or my enterprise is deployed. All I need to do is discover the location of the nearest edge proxy cache. And we're just going to use existing protocols from the web literature, like for example, WPAT for proxy discovery, to identify the location and the IP address of this nearest edge proxy cache. So that's the only change that, in fact, it's not even a change that needs to happen on the client side. So given these two pieces of the puzzle, let's actually walk through an end-to-end workflow of how IDICN might deliver content. So as we said, assume the origin server has already registered the names in a particular form. Now the client now requests a particular piece of content, l.p.idicn.org. If the proxy already has the content, it's just going to deliver the content to the client. If it doesn't, it's going to do a name resolution to find the location of the reverse proxy or the origin server in charge of this particular content label. It then fetches that particular, it then sends a request. This is a traditional GET request based on the IP address. This is a traditional IP request to the reverse proxy. Again, if the reverse proxy already has the content, it can send it back. If not, it fetches the content from the origin server. Then it sends the response, but it also sends some metadata. For example, the hash or the public key of the origin server along with the response. And then the response then is sent to the client. So this is a very simple workflow that sort of almost mimics existing HTTP-based delivery. And this is almost by intent, right? We intentionally chose this sort of somewhat backwards compatible and very simplistic design. There's one sort of key property that's left out here is how does the client verify that the content is really what Wikipedia or CNN really wanted me to see. And here we envision two possible sort of models here. One is if the client itself could be updated with a little piece of code to compute the crypto checksums and the integrity checks to verify that the content that is delivered really matches l.p.idicn.org. For example, we already have this cryptographic hash of the public key. We can check that's really the origin server and so on. On the other hand, if the client does not want to be upgraded, it could delegate this to the proxy with the sort of the caveat that it has to now trust the proxy to do the right kind of verification checks. It turns out you can actually implement this whole workflow using a lot of existing tools that's already being developed in the web literature. And we welcome you to try it out at this URL, idicn.org, where we have two representative samples of BBC and Wikipedia that we create cached copies using this entire workflow. And the nice thing is that this whole prototyping effort was quite simple because we could leverage a lot of existing technologies from say Apache and the web literature that already existed. All right. To summarize, sort of the motivation for this work was really simple, as I said. Can we get the benefits of ICN without really going to this deployment pain of upgrading the routers and upgrading the routing inside the network? And in some sense, if you want to think about it, This is really the end-to-end argument, the classical end-to-end argument applied to the ICN design space. We should mandate or require significant changes to the network infrastructure only if those changes provide significant benefits to the users. And what we find is that in terms of the quantitative benefits, latency, traffic engineering, and so on that ICN offers, we can actually get most of those benefits with incrementally deployable edge-based solutions. The sort of the complexity of pervasive caching or fancier in-network routing is not necessarily needed, especially for the kind of workloads we expect to see in the future. And you can get most of the qualitative benefits in terms of support for mobility, the security properties of ICN, and so on, with a lot of existing web literature. All right, and what we've shown here is we've sketched one particular design point called IDICN. Far from optimal, it's just a feasible realization. And there's a bunch of open issues, not just for IDICN, but also for ICN more broadly. Economics, privacy, as you can see in the next talk, other benefits, or how any of this will matter for future workloads, and so on. So with that, I'll conclude. I'm happy to take questions.